Hi, this is Bob Clarke, and you're listening to Snow the Goalie.
Russ, we have a really special guest on the Snow the Goalie podcast this week. It's a real honor for me as a guy who covered him as a general manager, watched him as a player. That's how old I am. Not to make you feel any older, Bob, but watched him as a player.
You've already done that, so thank you.
Covered him as a general manager. Flyers legend Bob Clarke joins us on the Snow the Goalie podcast. Bob, thanks for taking the time out.
Absolutely.
We really do appreciate it. One of the things I was excited to find out you were going to be back in town, and we said we got to talk to Bob. One of the things we wanted to ask about, especially since yesterday was the trade deadline for the current team, it's really kind of talk a little bit about what goes into this job for a general manager at this time of year. And I also want to ask you a little bit about Chuck, because I know you have a past history with him. So let's start with that first, and then we'll dive into what deadline day is like. But when the general manager change was happening here, I know that you came up from Florida and were kind of involved in the conversations, and Chuck Fletcher becomes the new GM. Obviously, he got his start with you down in Florida, right?
Yeah.
When you were the GM down there.
Yeah.
What attributes about Chuck Fletcher as a general manager really made him the kind of guy that would fit perfectly for this franchise?
Well, number one, we weren't a very good team. So we needed someone who was experienced, someone who had a different view of how you build a hockey team and those kind of things. Hexie had his own view, and you can't say it's wrong because it's his own view, but Chuck's was different, and he was experienced, and he's much more less private. Hexie was very, very private man, and again, I'm not saying that as a criticism,
right?
But Chuck was more open with everybody, so everybody felt like they were part of the team. Hexie was much more private. It's just a different style.
It's a style,
doing it.
right?
That's right.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously, you were always, when you were a general manager, you were the kind of guy who included everyone. Like, you talked to a lot of your scouts, and you talked to your assistants, and I mean, there's a process, right? I mean, most people just think this is a one-man operation, but the public doesn't realize just how many people are really involved in this, right?
Oh, you're right. Absolutely. Everybody has to. I mean, how do you have a team if everybody's not involved? But yesterday, when the trading deadline for the last 3 or 4 days, all the pro scouts are in and sitting in meetings, and Chuck's keeping them up to date on what's going on, and do you like this player? Do you like this deal and stuff? It's for me, I've been through that before, but it's really interesting to watch when it's going on, and I don't have any and don't want any
right.
say in any trades or none of that. That's Chuck's business.
Right.
But I had a really enjoyable 4 days just talking to the scouts and listening to those guys and their opinions and all that, and how it all came down to the end when they made the deal.
So when you mentioned scouting, I'm fascinated by this kind of thing. I know our listeners, viewers are. To pull back the curtain a little bit, versus the time that you were a GM in the league versus now, you talk about scouting and the network of scouts. The ability now that an organization has at a moment's notice to have film come in, game notes, it no longer has to be something where everybody is in the room. Now, the last couple of days leading up to the trade deadline, I would assume that they do. You said that.
Yeah.
Do you almost wish that in your time as a GM you would have had the information so readily available?
Well, in those days, you did think you had the information. It just took longer to get it and stuff, obviously. But
Right.
in those days, we were modern too for those days. It doesn't work in today's world. I mean,
Right.
these guys with their computers and all that stuff, they bring up every player from every team and everybody they saw and all that instantly. Of course, we didn't have that, but when you see it here over the last 3 or 4 days, the scouts talking to Chuck and each other and all that stuff, it hasn't changed that much in that respect. Just the information is a lot more and a lot quicker to get and stuff. You got analytics and all that kind of stuff. But the decision making that Chuck has still comes down to talking with the people who work for you and getting their opinions and all that kind of stuff. That hasn't changed.
When you look at analytics, do you sit there? I mean, I know you're kind of an old school guy. Do you kind of scoff at it a little bit at the way it's kind of being brought into the sport, or do you sit there and say, well, there is value to it, but just maybe not as much value as people might want to think that there is?
That'd be the proper way. I think it's an absolute necessity now for all these guys, but I think the gut feeling, the verbal talk between the scouts and Chuck and his staff and all that kind of stuff is still more important than the analytics. Some guys don't turn up very good on the analytical stuff, but they can play.
Right.
You got to make that decision: is if you're going to go by analytics, or can the guy play? Can he help us win? That's, thank heavens, that's Chuck's job.
Well, that is the thing that I knew Anthony and I go back and forth a lot about. And it feels like a lot of times people tend to side with whoever writes in an analytical manner because it looks intelligent, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, if you extrapolate data and you really put it over the course of a season, it might be the difference between a couple shots on goal. But in a percentage form, it looks really wildly intelligent.
Yeah.
When you hear things like, I don't know how often you're around, hearing this, but when you hear somebody say, well, the team's actually better than the numbers indicate because the expected goals say that they should, have, I don't know, two goals more in a game. And then that means that the Flyers, in theory, should be the third-ranked team in the Eastern Conference. Does that kind of stuff cloud the judgment of an evaluator? Does it cloud the judgment of the fans? Is it an unfair way to look at the sport as a whole?
Yeah, for me, I would think it's unfair. I mean, the results, if you win, you get 2 points, right? And if you got 80 points, you're probably in first place. Those are black and white. Now, what do the analytics tell you, that we should only have 60 points? Or those kind of things, for me, are like, it's a gut. Chuck knows hockey players. He knows the people he works for him. He knows what the team wants or what he would like to get to help the team, and those kind of things. That comes from your intelligence and your hockey gut feelings, not from analytics.
When you first hired Chuck, what was it about him as a young guy back then that really made you say, this is a kid that's going to be really good in this role and then eventually go on to being a good general manager? I mean, obviously you knew his dad, but I mean, I don't necessarily think that it was it's nepotism, right? He's, Cliff Fletcher's son, but he's a smart kid, right?
Chuck, I knew Chuck was smart, and he was working for a Donnie Meehan, an agent up there in Toronto, and I called Donnie and asked if, I could talk to Chuck. I don't know, Chuck was 27 or 28, but I never talked to his dad. His dad and I are real good friends, and
right.
have been for 30 or 40 years, but I never talked to his dad about it. I was hiring somebody for the Florida Panthers, and how he could help me. Like, it wasn't like I was doing him any favors. I needed help, and I had to find somebody to help, and he did. He was perfect from day one. And personality, work ethic, those kind of things are very, very important when you're the general manager, because Chuck was my assistant. We spent a lot of time together. So you got to like the guy, and you hope that he challenges you. And Chuck's a bright guy, bright hockey guy. He challenged us, what we were doing, and it was very easy to work together. I made the final decisions, but he did most of the work.
As it usually is, right?
That's how it usually goes. Yeah, he did the work, and then I'll.
You take all the credit.
But we discussed it. There was no. We started a team. That's pretty good, and we didn't do it on our own. We had to hire scouts and all that, and he was a big part of it. And he's young, but like I don't know. I don't really see age as being a big factor. He's capable of doing the job. I didn't care if he was 28 or 38 or 48.
Well, you were young when you were first named the general manager.
Yeah, 35.
You were 35, right? Yeah. I mean, that was.
If you're capable, age shouldn't be a factor.
Right, and I mean that was well before the time now where everything is, oh, go young, go young, go young.
yeah.
And, they were like, are you kidding me? We're going to name a guy fresh off of playing his playing career to be a general manager.
Yeah.
Did you know pretty early that he would then excel to get to the point where he's been a GM in the league for as long as he has? Did you have an inkling then?
Oh yeah. I actually thought that I would end up staying in Florida for a lot longer, and he would probably take over when I'd had enough. But and again, it's his own life. When I hired him, he was single, and then he got married and started a family and stuff. I didn't know if he wanted to spend the rest of his life in hockey. Only he knew that.
Right.
But obviously did, and had to move a few times and move his family and stuff, but worked his way to the top. And has been a terrific general manager.
Yeah.
Not only for us here just getting started, but in Minnesota.
And I'm sure you've had an opportunity to talk to him, and he wouldn't be here if this organization didn't like the vision that he had. But I mean, I'm sure he expressed that to you guys. It's something that, I mean, you probably are right on board with where he wants to take the Flyers and how he wants to get them back to prominence again and back to being an elite team in this league.
Well, Paul Holmgren hired Chuck. And,
right, yeah.
And Paul and I are like brothers, obviously, and so we talked a lot about it, but he had done all his background work. We knew Chuck's records, we knew everything about him, and I knew him personally, not that close over the last few years, but it was an easy decision, I think, for Homer to make. And I talked to them a lot about it, but it wasn't my decision. He had to make that himself. But I think that my knowledge of Chuck and everything else that he's done in the NHL made it a pretty easy decision for Homer.
So, taking into account, I guess, one of the more important things, especially the Flyers going into the offseason, Chuck's going to have roughly $30 to $35 million in cap space, which I'm sure would be a heck of a thing to step into any kind of situation like that where you have that much space in a salary cap era. I go back to 2005 because I happen to be the youngest one at the table, although you're not that much farther off from me, I'm sure. When you went out and acquired Peter Forsberg, who was coming off of, 2 years prior, was an MVP in the league. I mean, that stole all of the headlines from the entire city. I mean, the Flyers were the number one talk of the town. When you look at what this offseason could be, there are obviously guys that are out there that are going to both hit unrestricted free agency and, of course, restricted free agency. A lot of young, attractive players, especially in the RFA market. From your experience as a GM, what dictates that moment for an organization where it's time to go for it? The moment where you sit down and say, like, if it's an unrestricted free agent, it's going to cost you money. RFAs, we don't see many teams offer sheets to restricted free agents for, I guess, a myriad of reasons. If you could speak to that, that'd be awesome. But
well, you're going to see it. The restricted free agents, just because of the salary cap. Teams get a restricted free agent coming up, and they've only got $3 million or $4 million left in cap space. Someone's going to come in and offer $5 million. They want the player, or $6 million. Maybe they're going to overpay to get him, but it's going to happen that way. And even the free agency, for me, you have to have an organization that a player wants to come to. I mean, if you had an organization and you're paying $6 million, and I have an organization paying $6 million, if you've got a bad organization, you might have to pay $7 or $8 million. But a good organization that a player wants to come to, and I think players only want to come to a team that's trying to win. If these teams that planning on spending 5 or 6 years on the bottom of the league are going to have a tough time attracting a player. Players want to win, and if your organization is being built to try and win, you'll have a shot at getting these guys.
do you think the reason that we don't see a lot of offer sheets to RFAs has to do with the compensatory picks that are
tied to it?
That are tied to it, or could it be a combination of that and just the human element of? I mean, if you pry away a team's prized possession that they can't afford any longer, there is that risk of burning a bridge with a team, right?
Who cares?
Okay, so
cares,
in your
right?
case, it's who cares.
That's
Okay.
I mean, I believe that speaking for Chuck, of course. But when I was a GM, I only cared about the Flyers. I didn't care about any other club.
Right.
If the rules are there, use them. And they're there, whatever works best, that's your job, right? I wouldn't care about insulting anybody or anything like that. Do your own job, I'll do mine.
But is that why most over the years a lot of teams have not gone after RFAs, because you don't want to? It's like a gentleman's agreement almost, and some people break it every once in a while.
Yeah, at all the years, and I signed a couple guys at Grattan,
yeah,
those kind of deals. Some guys get some general managers might get pissed off at you, but the ones who know and understand, they just realize you're using the rules. The rules are written, and I once had an agent. His name was Don Baisley from Winnipeg. Terrific human being. He's passed since, but he said to me, he was Forsberg's agent anyway, but he said, Clarke, if you guys don't use the rules, we're going to change them.
Yeah.
The next collective bargaining agreement, if you're not using them, if they're not working, we'll change them.
Yeah.
And he was absolutely right. You got the rules are there. There's a reason that it's collectively bargained, so use them. If you can make them favor you, I think. Anyway,
yeah, that's great. Yeah. What's deadline day like? I mean, if we're looking to pull back the curtain a little bit. We don't need to just go into specifics about yesterday, right? But what's it like?
Unless you want to.
No, but what's it like for a general manager? How many teams are you talking to? Is there a lot of phone calls? Is it like, all right, we're going to get right back to you, and then you're getting close to 3:00? I mean, I know Chuck said yesterday they put this trade in at 2:57. I mean, that's right up against it. Like, what is that frenzy like on that last day?
The last day, obviously, you've got buyers and sellers, right?
Right.
Everybody knew that Wayne Simmons was going to become a unrestricted free agent, and the Flyers would probably have to move him.
Right.
So the meetings, like for about 3 days, you're sitting there, and one team's calling and suggesting this, and another team's calling and suggesting that, and then all of a sudden somebody makes a deal, and does that increase what your player is worth, or does it decrease it, or does this take a team out who's interested in him? And all that's kind of like, for me, I'm sitting in with the scouts and everybody. Chuck's in and out. Obviously, he's got his office and his phone, and he's working. But it's really fun to watch. Uh-huh. And I would guess it's probably the most exciting time for a GM. The draft is exciting too, but this kind of stuff, if you're a GM, and when I really enjoyed the week, 3 or 4 days leading up to the trade deadline date and all that kind of stuff. You're talking with everybody, you know what's going on, and you're trying to make a deal good for your club, and I think it's a pretty exciting time for a GM.
In your experience as a GM, because we've seen this, especially since Wayne got traded, so it doesn't have to be specific to him, but in your experience, it feels like, at least optics-wise, fans tend to think that if the return wasn't what they expected, they tend to say that maybe the team held on to a guy for too long, maybe his value was better a month ago, 2 months ago. In your experience, is it kind of 50-50? Are there moments where, as a GM, a guy's value skyrockets at the last minute because there's a feeding frenzy for him? Do we have a lot of situations where guys' value maybe does drop off because a couple other trades get made on deadline day?
I guess it could. If you're like Chuck knew what value he wanted for Wayne Simmons.
Right.
That doesn't mean you're going to get it, obviously, and you're trying with how many teams. I don't know. He could tell you guys how many teams were involved up till the very end, and did Winnipeg getting that big guy from the Rangers influence David Poile to want Wayne Simmons?
Right.
Those things are all in play, and I guess the closer you get to the, I think probably the GMs all avoid making the final decision till they get exactly what they think they want. And obviously in Simmons' case, it went right to the end.
How's your handicap these days, Bob?
I'm a crappy golfer. I play a lot. You don't get any better, About a 14, so
That's
helps.
pretty good.
That's not bad at all.
Yeah, I play 6 days a week though.
I lose 14 balls in the first hole if I go golfing. It's a mess.
I'm an expert at doing nothing. I go.
That's great. That's great. You know what I wanted to ask you about? When I was a kid, my dad took me, and this could never happen in professional sports today, but my dad took me some field in New Jersey, and you guys had like a summer barnstorming softball team.
Oh yeah.
Right? I mean,
Yeah,
and
I had a good
everybody
team,
played.
Yeah. Everybody played.
Everybody played. What was that like? I mean, to have the team in the off season still kind of being together and working, and then if you could, who was a good player, good softball player, and who was really not a very good softball player back then?
We were bringing in some American kids like Paul Holmgren could really play. Tommy Gorntz, Al Hill come out of British Columbia, but he could really play. We had some really good ball players. I was probably the worst on the team. I was captain, so I got to.
You got to play wherever you wanted.
I got to play where I wanted. Yeah, but it was a great. I don't know how it could ever happen again. Like,
Right.
Most of us were pretty young, had young families, were part of the community. We didn't have 2 or 3 houses and stuff, and didn't have the luxury of just traveling all over like today's players do. It's better today's players, I guess they have more.
Right.
But we had our softball team would go play. Our trainers put up the schedule, so we'd have about a 20-game schedule, and we'd go to the neighborhood and play ball, and then go to somebody's house and drink beer and eat hot dogs and stuff with them, with all the other teams' ball players and their families and stuff. It was probably pretty unique, but it was really neat for the players. We were just part of the community.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I think all of sports misses.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the fact that you guys were a part of the fabric. I mean, you guys made this your home, and whereas nowadays, for the most part, some athletes are in cities year round, but for the most part, guys come in for the season and then they go wherever they've got to go after that. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that made for better team experience environment. You know what I'm saying? Because you were around each other 12 months of the year.
It certainly didn't hurt. I think today's world, obviously, when we're talking about the early 70s, the players on our team, just the way it was, were financially a lot closer to the regular people in your community. Now the athletes, their salaries have gone so far off in comparison to the 70s. And thank heavens, if you're an athlete, that's everybody wanted to make more money and stuff. But it was I don't know even how to describe it, because I think what the players got now is terrific. And we were part of the social scene, but these guys do way more visiting hospitals, visiting this. These players of today, the kids that are coming into the locker room and all that kind of. Drew does more than, holy mackerel, than I ever did. But he probably doesn't have the opportunity to be part of, parent teachers association like my wife was and all that. He doesn't have kids, right? He does more than we did, but we did all the players do more of that, mingling and visiting hospitals and all that stuff. We were part of the community, but didn't get out to those kind of affairs. It just wasn't done in those days. Once in a while you'd get to see a kid, but and the Phillies were really good at the time, and the Eagles. There was lots of great teams around, lots of great athletes.
Yeah,
it was fun.
It was different. It was
different. It was just
time.
Hell. Every business you're in is different after 10 years, and then 20, and now it's 40.
There's one thing that I've really been wondering. You've spent your entire adult life in and around the National Hockey League, and playing hockey as a kid all the way up through your career, and then a pretty quick turnaround going into a front office. When you knew it was time to hang up the skates and make that next transition of the career, it seems like a lot of times guys say that they don't want to give that up because they still feel those same kind of the emotional and physical drawback to the sport, even watching it. A lot of guys say that they like to take time away from it because they find themselves wanting to jump off the couch, right, and get back in. when you made that initial transition, and then even at this stage of your career, does the player in you still react? Do you still get that kind of natural instinct to get back out there, or are you away from that?
For me, I never. Once I made the decision to take the general manager's job that was offered to me, I never really. I mean, I like to go on the ice, skate around and stuff, but I never really thought about playing it that much again. But when I retired from being a GM, I found that what I missed the most was just like what we went through here today, with about all the scouts and just sitting and talking hockey, about every part of hockey and players. And when you live in Florida like I do, you don't have a group to get together.
Right.
But when I come back up here, there's, I get to sit and talk with Chuck and Holmgren and the coaches and all that stuff. That I love that. And I'm not in a decision-making mode, so I can talk and say and everything else.
Right.
That's what I miss the most.
Is that kind of nice to be able to just throw out whatever it is that you think or feel, and know that really it doesn't come back to you either way?
Yeah. You're a little bit. I mean, you don't want to start saying things that make it look like you want to run the club and stuff, but Chuck knows me good enough, and Homer knows me good enough that I can talk and ask questions and stuff. And both of those are strong men. They can make their own decisions. It's not. I would never try and put myself in a position where I'm trying to make a decision and stuff like that. And I wouldn't want to. But I do really love sitting there. And we all go over to Ott's here last night after it's all over. There's about 10 of us at the table drinking beer and talking hockey and who made a good decision and what teams got better. And, you're not solving any problems, but you're talking about them.
That's good. That's good.
And it's fun.
Yeah. The last thing I want to ask you, I know that every summer you go back, you have a house on a lake up in Flin Flon, but I'm told that you don't like to fish. So what is a guy who does not a lot of nothing when they're at their summer house, their summer cottage, and they don't live on a lake and they don't fish? What the heck do you do when you're up there?
Well, they got a 9-hole golf course. But
okay.
We play with my nephews and brother-in-law and stuff maybe once, twice a week. But I fish. We'll probably fish maybe. We got the boat, so we go out. But I'm not one of those guys who's going to go find a lake where you got to traipse through the bush and take a quad and all that. My nephews do all that stuff. My son does all that. I don't like fishing that much. But I like sitting on a boat and drinking beer and throwing a line over and hoping you don't catch anything because you don't want to take it off the line,
You've mentioned drinking beer a lot, which is
hey, I like drinking beer, right?
So usually we ask a food question or something like. So let me ask you this: in your playing days, what was your go-to? And has your taste in beer changed? Especially because craft beer is like the thing. Has anything changed, or is it still just like the same?
There's no bad beers. I come through it, like I grew up in a mining town where even younger guys, and I was diabetic too, and I was supposed to be, but everybody, the kids 15, 16, 17 started drinking beer. Probably the same down here, and then when I come to Philadelphia, like beer was a staple as part of a hockey team.
Right.
There was beer in the locker room and for after the games and stuff. And that was a normal thing. Play hockey and go have a few beers. So after practice even, have a sandwich and a couple beers. That was just part of our life. They didn't even think. Today's world, that's the wrong thing to do, obviously.
Yeah.
And it was the wrong thing to do then, only that's the way we were all taught and did it. And I love sitting and talking hockey, as I've said, but anything. Get 3 or 4 guys together and a couple beers and just bullshit. That's wonderful for me.
It is.
Yeah.
I remember the days there used to be beer in the press box.
Yeah, I'll bet. Yeah.
You guys used to offer us a couple beers in the press box after the game was over.
Man, I missed the boat on
You missed the boat on this, right? So you grew up in the wrong time, right?
So I guess it's fair to say that sports science would have probably ruined a little bit of your time plan. Wouldn't have made it quite as fun. Right?
Well, that's great. Well, Bob, listen, we really appreciate it. You gave us a great half hour. Thank you for the time. Really do appreciate it, and
Yeah.
enjoy the trip back to Florida. We're jealous because we have to stay up here in the cold for another month while you get to be down there.
Okay.
Thanks
Great,
again.
guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.